Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Metro Inner Development Assessment Panel. I declare the meeting open at 9:32 a.m. and I acknowledge we're hosting this meeting on the traditional land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We acknowledge the Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of Western Australia, pay respect to elders past and present, and the ongoing connection between people, land, waters, and community. This meeting will be run in accordance with the DAP Standing Orders 2024 under the DAP Regulations 2011. The meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the DAP website in accordance with Regulation 42A of the DAP Regulations. Panel members may refer to technical devices throughout the meeting to assist them in considering the information before them. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our members that are participating today. My name is Dale Page. I'm the presiding member today. With me to my left, I have Karen Hyde, who is our deputy presiding member, and John Syme, who is our specialist member. For our part B of our agenda, we have Councillor Ingrid Van Dawson. Councillor Van Dawson is online, and we have Councillor the City of Fremantle. For our Town of Cambridge item, we have Councillor Kate Barlow and Deputy Mayor Mays. Item 2, apologies, they are nil today. Item 3, noting of minutes. All minutes of all previous meetings are available on the DAP website. Moving then on to Part B, the City of Fremantle. Item 1 is declaration of due consideration. Panel members need to have considered all the documentation contained in Part B of the agenda and the Part B related information that was published to our website. Could I please confirm by a show of hands that members have considered all information? Thank you. Item 2, disclosures of interest. I have received a disclosure of impartiality interest from Councillor Van Dawson, given Councillor Van Dawson received a briefing on the item from the city's offices. Councillor, may I check just for the record whether that briefing was on the facts of the matter only as contained in the report, or whether you received any additional information which the other panel members may not have received?
No, I can confirm it was just the facts of the what's contained in the RA.
Thank you. Councillor Sullivan, I believe you were not part of that.
I forgot to attend.
Wonderful. That's great. So you do not have the same interest. I would just like to point out that there is a standing declaration of interest for the DAPs, that if an agenda item has been considered at a council meeting or the local government DAP members have been briefed by the staff, they acknowledge that in accordance with section 249 of the DAP Code of Conduct, that they make that declaration, but they are not bound by any previous decisions or resolution of the council or any matters that were discussed at that meeting, and they undertake to exercise independent judgment in relation to the matters before them today. Given that standing declaration of interest, I am happy for Councillor Van Dawson to continue participating in the meeting and thank her for making the declaration. Do any other members have any declarations they would like to make? All right, moving then on to item 3 on our agenda for Part B is our Form 1 DAP application for Lot 6, 7, 301, 770 and 771, which is number 64 Victoria Street, Fremantle, proposed 6-level mixed-use development, DAP number 25/02955. We have 6 presenters on this item today. We have David Congdon, who will be speaking against the application, Ken Perry against the application, James Theodore from MARPROP in support of the application, Cale Otter from Element in support, and Dan Lees from Element in support. And I believe they are also supported here today by Dominic and advisor Snellgrove. Welcome to all of you. Presenters, I remind you in accordance with clause 482 of our standing orders that your presentations are generally limited to 3 minutes. I haven't given any extensions time to the presenters for this item. We have read all the written documentation you've provided, so we encourage you to focus on the key points you'd like to get across within your 3 minutes. Panel members will be able to ask you questions afterwards. We'll start with David Congdon. David, come forward, please. 3 minutes starts when you're ready, and I'll call you to time when it.
Thank you, panel. I represent my client, who's an adjacent landowner who, like many, will be affected by this development. Let me start with the term quid pro quo, a favour or an advantage granted in return for something. Simply put, something for something. Now, in most instances, the provisions and standards of the scheme is the default position, and they shouldn't be varied without strong planning reasons. There's also a planning principle that provisions which address more specific issues generally prevail over provisions that are more general in scope. This proposal does not accord with the scheme's development controls or the criteria required to support the discretion of additional height. The applicant acknowledges this and has stated, it should be noted the proposal is not seeking additional height in accordance with section 2312G, rather the variation sought in accordance with clause 4811. So as we all know, all of the planning framework adopted and relevant to this matter needs to be considered, not just those parts that between themselves reinforce a particular outcome. To say this part applies and this part doesn't, well, that's kooky talk. Even if the panel were to depart from the principles of orderly and proper planning and not consider the development controls planned for this site, there needs to be strong planning grounds to do so. To quote the exercising of discretion guidelines, if the exercising of discretion is to be an orderly one, the planning principles identified as relevant to application should not be lightly departed from without demonstration of sound basis for doing so, which basis itself is grounded in planning law principle. The discretion sought is well documented and significant without any real grounds for support. When in isolation, some may be acceptable. However, the cumulative impact is greater. Therefore, any discretion shouldn't be made in isolation, but in the context of the overall development. Now let's consider the community benefits that have been listed in light of quid pro quo. There's the extensive commercial amenity offered at ground floor, promoting public transport use over private car use, a public art contribution, one less crossover, and my personal favourite, pedestrian awning. So putting aside these planning requirements, we're left with not a single community benefit, not one single community benefit, not even design excellence. So I ask each member today, what is so exceptional about this proposal that will offset any or even all of the negative impacts the community's raised? Are you going to give your discretion open and freely without getting anything in return?
Your time is up, David, so I'll ask you to draw.
Thank you. Oh,
you make those.
Clearly, this proposal represents an overdevelopment of living areas and an underdevelopment of parking, and I respectfully request the panel's refusal for these reasons. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start with our member online. Councillor Van Dawson, do you have any questions for this presenter?
No, for me, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sullivan?
Yeah, just you mentioned you're speaking on behalf of a adjoining property. Could you explain what you consider to be the impact of the development on the adjoining owners?
There's a couple of major things. There's the bulk and scale of the building, which is excessive in terms of the planning framework allows for a portion of the site, which is on the corner of James Street and Queen Victoria Street, to be permitted with additional height. This application proposes additional height over the entirety of the site. So it's far larger than it needs to be. One of their other major concerns is parking. Their parking shortfall, which strangely has increased from 240 when it was advertised to 267 in the Responsible Authorities report, that reflects a significant impact on the surrounding public parking, and it would consume in excess of 50, I think it was 52% of all parking within a 400-metre radius of the site. So there's already a shortfall of parking, partially due to another co-living development that's been approved in close proximity. And having these two co-living developments approved in such close proximity with such a shortfall of parking is going to really compound the issues for the local community.
Any other questions from other panel members? No, thank you. I would just like to clarify. So for me, your submission strongly focused on community benefit versus planning merit and discretion. So is it your view that discretion can or should only be exercised if there are demonstrable community benefits? What if the panel feels there's general planning merit?
I think when we look at the totality of all the factors that need to be considered, including social outcomes, community outcomes, etc., compliance with planning framework, I believe that a weighted decision or a balanced decision, really what's being proposed is excessive for the site, and a lot of those problems could be, dealt with additional parking and basement parking, or altering the accommodation of perhaps having less single bedroom apartments, different configurations.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
The next presenter is Ken Perry. Mr. Perry.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. As I indicated in my brief written submission, there seem to be a few key issues or questions, and I'd like to pick up on one I didn't mention, which David raised, which was the parking shortfall issue. The City of Fremantle seems to have its own way of dealing with parking. I noticed that the Essex Street development, you were discouraging parking there. So the City of Fremantle has got to deal with that in my view. The most important one for me is heritage. I can't judge heritage. My taste senses are about as good as my musical ability, and quite frankly, I'm never allowed out of the house without first being checked by my wife, who's appropriately dressed. What's the point of having a heritage building like the wool stores if it's not even just dwarfed, but even just surrounded by like scale business? If you're going to have a heritage thing, and wool stores is magnificent, it's been redeveloped, it's fabulous. I just get a sense that a 5-story development here would greatly enhance the view of heritage. Now, I know that the Heritage Council has given it a tick. I think they would have given it 2, 3 or 4 ticks if it was 5 stories. I know that the RAR says okay. Unfortunately, we no longer get to hear what the council thinks prior to these meetings, and that's a major detriment to the effectiveness of our decision making. Community benefit. My view is that the 1% art contribution is nothing other than a tax on development at a time when we're trying to make developers happy. So as far as I'm concerned, $550,000 is a distinct community benefit that's going to come. If the height's reduced from 6 to 5 stories, that quote loss is another community benefit because it could have been done. It's like preserving trees and things. The missing links to me are management. I know that when we're talking about Essex Street, how that was all going to be managed was an important part. I couldn't find it in the conditions, and I think that needs, it's pretty easy to add that, but that certainly needs to be there. The only thing I would add is that that we are all biased by our experiences, and you as decision makers must be biased by yours. The unfortunate thing is in the system the way we have, and this is what places a greater obligation of you, the government-appointed members of the DAP panel. You're
at your 3 minutes. I'll ask you.
Okay. Just be aware that you're operating with biases, and good luck in making your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Don't go just yet. Councillor Van Dawson online. Are there any questions for Mr. Perry?
And not from me, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sullivan? No? Any other panel members? No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Perry. All right, our next presenter is James Theodore from Marlborough. Online. Hi, James. Your 3 minutes starts when you are ready.
Thanks very much. Australia's in a housing crisis. There's a desperate need for dwellings. Co-living obviously solves for the widest share of the market as it's so versatile. We're able to offer 3 month to 3 year leases. Furthermore, any additional extras can be purchased when and if the individual or couple require them. This includes storage areas, car sharing vehicles, as well as rental items that could be for computer equipment that an individual may be coming for 3 months and doesn't want to necessarily purchase a monitor. The individual could do that, and there's a sustainability component of that as well. The Queen Victoria project has beyond grade amenity with multiple dining areas, a laundry, cinema, gym, sauna, and a large open air atrium, increasing natural light and cross ventilation in the majority of all apartments, which range from studios to 3 bedrooms. With respect to the car parking shortfall that's being questioned, we note that in Sydney, where co-living is prevalent, most of Daniel Lees and Kale Otter will speak to the exact statistics as I don't have those on hand, but I believe it's 1 in 10 are being used for example, say there's 100 apartments, there's only 10 that are really being utilised in full capacity. So therefore, we see that as a approximate solution for the shortfall. That's all.
Thank you, James. Councillor Van Dawson, any questions for this presenter?
Not from me, thank you.
Councillor Sullivan? The panel members?
Thank you. Karen Hyde speaking. Thank you for your presentation. In terms of operational management, previous speakers spoke about potentially the need for an operational management plan. How would you ordinarily manage properties of this nature and considerations around tenants coming and going and
we'll have a full, sorry, is that?
Yep, carry on.
Yeah, we'll have a full operational management plan in process. Obviously, we're talking to a couple of people, including UCO, which have got 2,200 beds across the country, as well as Here Property, which is actually in Leederville, who have expressed interest to that. But it will be professionally managed. There'll be an on-site manager, which will be there from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. each day. They won't live on site, but there will always be someone available during the normal hours for them to have access to being able to turn over the places, manage all the cleaning, etc.
Right, thank you for that answer.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up on that? So you won't be the operator. You will subcontract the operator. You'll license.
We're working through that now. We haven't ruled anything out, but the likely solution will be a subcontracted manager, which has already got circa 2,000 rooms under management.
What happens if your business plan doesn't work?
In terms of co-living failing, you mean?
In terms of you're not getting the revenue that you need to make this a viable proposition?
I believe, personally, I don't really believe that that's the case in this particular scenario, given the demand. Regardless, I believe that there was an analysis done to be able to turn the existing numerous co-living boxes into a series of more 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. Is that, I believe that was submitted as part of the pack. So they can be altered later down the track if need be.
So your backstop is to turn these into standard apartments?
Well, we're not actually, we don't believe that we're ever going to do that, but we were asked by council to be able to, when we were doing the, what was it called? The design review panel process within the city of Fremantle. They questioned that and we presented that as an option.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much for that, James. Kale Otter. I'm going to let Cale Otter and Dan Lees present their minutes one after the other, and then we'll open for questions. If there's any crossover. Cale, your time starts when you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, panel members. Thank you for this opportunity to speak briefly in support of the development at 64 Queen Victoria Street, Fremantle. We thank the City of Fremantle for the support of this project and the positive responsible authority report, clearly setting out the planning merits of this proposal and showing its commitment to realising the city's strategic vision for the Fremantle City Centre. This development represents a unique opportunity to deliver a much needed housing supply in an innovative form, activating an underutilised site to increase residential population. The proximity to Fremantle City Centre and high frequency public transport also provides a strong rationale for the emerging context of the neighbourhood as a high density mixed use area. The proposed development provides a direct response to the objectives and aims of the strategic planning framework, such as the city's strategic community plan, which recognises the requirement to socially and economically revitalise the core of the city, with a focus on increasing both its working and residential populations. Furthermore, the approach adopted by the development is consistent with the Perth and Peel at 3.5 million framework, which identified this Fremantle City Centre as an important area for high density residential and commercial growth. The design of the building has been informed through thorough engagement with both the city's officers and their appointed design advisory committee, of which we met with on 4 occasions, ensuring alignment on the 10 principles of good design under State Planning Policy 7.0. Following the post-lodgement DAC meeting, the DAC expressed broad support for the proposed development and endorsed the overall built form approach. Through proactive engagement with the city and its appointed DAC, the development as proposed represents a high quality outcome for Fremantle that reflects a high standard of design and locates comfortably within both its existing and planned site context. The proposed mix of ground floor active uses and higher density living options will cater for the diverse and evolving needs of the local community amidst a statewide housing crisis. As outlined within our supporting town planning report, the proposed development aligns with the principles of proper and orderly planning and meets the intent of all the relevant planning framework. In conclusion, we fully support the recommendation of the responsible authority report and have no objections to the recommended conditions of planning approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cale. And good morning, panel members. I would also like to thank the city's officers for their work in assessing this application and confirm our full support of the recommendation for approval and the conditions. We've heard some comments today raising objection to the proposed building height, heritage interface and car parking. And I'd like to briefly seek to respond to these for the benefit of the panel and to respectfully request your approval. This application does call for the exercise of your discretion, which we believe you can responsibly and justifiably exercise, a conclusion also reached by the city and the Design Advisory Committee. The planning scheme clearly sets out a series of considerations or tests for additional building height, and the notion of providing community benefit is not one of them specifically in this scheme. The planning scheme calls for an assessment of the height of existing surrounding buildings and consideration of the proposed additional height in this context. This, in my view, is an entirely appropriate means by which to consider additional building height in a built-up urban context such as this, where it is commonplace for a variety of building heights to exist as buildings get progressively developed over time, with some broad degree of consistency. The figure series on pages 27 and 28 of your agenda show the 3D massing of the proposal in its context, noting both the contemporary apartment development on the eastern side of Queen Victoria Street and the immediately adjacent Dalgety Wool Stores, which is a state registered heritage place. This application was supported by a heritage impact statement and referred to both the city's heritage officers and the Heritage Council of WA. Attachment 12 of the report provides the Heritage Council's considered advice and the concluding comment of support for the project. The city's heritage officers also support the project. The Heritage Council specifically considered the proposed building height and the fact that this proposal would be taller than the Dalgety Wool Stores. We must acknowledge this peak body expert advice from the Heritage Council. Comments have also been raised regarding the provision of car parking and specifically the city's approach to this. I think the City of Fremantle ought to be applauded for taking a pragmatic and forward-thinking approach to the provision of car parking in developments generally. The market reality is that demand for on-site car parking can be managed by limiting its supply. As James has articulated, this is not a typical build-to-sell residential apartment development. Co-living residents generally live a more transient lifestyle, staying for shorter terms, and with private vehicle ownership being typically less than amongst typical apartment residents. The use of share cars is closely aligned with the shared amenities philosophy that underpins co-living, and each of the 6 share cars have been estimated to offset the demand for between 9 and 50 vehicles based on a range of studies undertaken particularly over East. The
3 minutes is up, Dan, if you'd like to close.
Better close, thank you. Look, in closing, the central location and access to high-frequency public transport represent an appropriate alternative solution to providing on-site cars. This project seeks to make best use of valuable land within the city of Fremantle, replacing an inactive private car park with an innovative form of accommodation and hotel rooms that will both provide economic activation and employment opportunities via the hotel, as well as much needed housing supply in a great location. I'd respectfully request your approval, and as you've noted, we have the design team, Dominic and Eliza Snellgrove from CCN Architects, should you have any design-based questions.
Thank you. Councillor Van Dawson, any questions for the Element team?
Not from me, thank you.
Councillor Sullivan?
Yes, thank you. The previous speakers talked about the hierarchy of the planning scheme in terms of utilisation of different clauses. Obviously, this area has a development control that was specifically identified each site with height parameters. Can you talk to why you feel it would be possible or justified to utilise a more general clause in the scheme as opposed to the very specific height requirements that were set forward after a detailed process?
Yes, you're absolutely right. This is a very specific set of building heights that the planning scheme has established, as you say, through detailed built form modelling and analysis that was done at a point in time. I think things have moved on somewhat. I think the use of a discretionary clause that's in the scheme is appropriate here because it does allow for alternate designs to be tested, and in this case recommended for approval. The body of work that was done to inform the very specific building heights and the sub areas that are in the planning scheme was done at a point in time. I would respectfully suggest that, as I said, expectations and acceptance of building height does move with time as areas evolve, as developments proceed, and the fact that there are a very specific set of criteria in here, which do also themselves allow for additional height to be sought through the clause that this application is not pursuing, which is an additional 4 metres of building height via either design quality, distinctive architecture, best practice ESD, landscaping or accessible public places. Those are all criteria that this development has to a certain extent. However, it's the general clause that's been pursued here based on existing buildings in the vicinity that are already over the building height. This building does have a high quality of design that's been considered by the Design Advisory Committee. As we've heard, we've been there 4 times, and the concluding remarks from the committee were that this project warranted approval and support. The ESD report, which underpins this project, demonstrates that we will come to a 4-star Green Star or equivalency rating. So we are still pursuing 4-star Green Star is considered best practice ESD with respect to landscaping and publicly accessible places. We are proposing to increase the number of street trees as well as improve the James Street and Queen Victoria Street footpath areas through the parklet and the opportunity for the cafe to spill out onto James Street.
A supplementary question to that. It suggested that you didn't apply to use that extra height clause that's in the controls. Is that because of concern about meeting the excellence in design criteria, or because the controls were only over a part of the site and that would have then potentially excluded the higher building on the other part of the site?
The scheme very well, Councillor Sullivan, and the latter comment of yours, yes, really informed why we didn't pursue that particular clause in the planning scheme, because it led to restrictions in terms of where the additional height could be placed on the site.
So do you contend that in the part of the site where additional height is permitted with design quality, that it would have met that criteria?
I think it probably would have, yes, and I think our experience with the Design Advisory Committee was a positive one, and yes, I believe it would have. I guess the other aspect of that is the publicly accessible pedestrian environment. This is a very urban part of Fremantle. The policy for this area calls for buildings to be built up to the street edge. So I think it could also undermine the built form outcome if there was a planning scheme requirement to introduce a public parklet or plaza area within the property, rather than achieving this active hard edge to the street boundaries, which really characterises this part of Victoria Street.
Any other panel members?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. You've had a look at the Responsible Authority report and the conditions as proposed. Do you have any issues with those?
No, we don't. So we spoke to the city as they were being drafted and very comfortable with the recommendation.
Right. A previous presenter did speak to operational management plans being something that could be considered for a development of this nature, where you have a transient residential population, and I think the previous speaker, the operator or proponent, spoke in that respect that would be a normal requirement. Would you have any objection to an operational management plan being required as a condition of approval?
No.
Thank you. What is your understanding around condition 24 that talks to lot amalgamation or an agreement? The lot amalgamation seems to cover 5 lots, where the agreement seems to cover 2 lots. So I just wondered if what your understanding of those requirements might be.
That's a very good pickup. I had not picked up that distinction between the legal agreement referring to 2 lots and the amalgamation.
Yes.
The subject site. My advice to the client would be we would pursue an amalgamation of the lots.
Yes.
Into a single lot.
Okay, I might refer that to the officers in a little while as well, just to seek some clarification. And in terms of built form, I think, again, the proponent spoke to the potential for built form adaptability, that it could translate into more permanent residential accommodation or whatever. How do you see that factoring into the parking analysis? One of the arguments for a parking shortfall of this nature is obviously that it's a transient population. They're staying for a short period of time, and notwithstanding that there's access to public transport, etc., etc. But do you see those conditions changing if there were at some point in future an adaptable built form, and would that in its own right actually trigger a change of use application or something of that nature?
Well, I think it probably would trigger a DA amendment requirement. There might be built form changes in terms of amalgamating some of the studios or micro apartments, as well as the land use change. The land use that the city has identified, which I think is appropriate, is residential building. So yes, if these were to be converted to typical build to sell apartments. I think multiple dwelling would be the appropriate land use. So yes, I think car parking would need to be considered at that point in time. And I guess this whole discussion about expectation for car bays and demand for car bays based on the specifics of an occupant type, based on where we are at that point in time. I think that's a matter for a potential future application.
Okay. Nevertheless, there is some level of adaptability and future sustainability for this particular built form. I think you confirmed that. And condition 15 talks to something to do with the awnings. What is your understanding of the requirement for further details and plans for the awnings within Queen Victoria Street Reserve?
It would be project experience with the City of Fremantle would be a separate engineering approval,
Right.
like to really detail specifics of the awning, separation from the curb line, the height above the footpath, all of those very sort of detailed, perhaps more technical matters.
Yep.
The city is supportive of awnings as drawn, but mindful that they sit out of the property boundary, they sit
Yes.
in the reserve. So
Yep.
at the end of the day, there are maintenance and liability matters that need to be worked in detail with the city to make sure that the awnings are safe and their working vehicle strike, particularly noting that this is a common.
Thank you. No further questions from me. Thank you. Further from you?
Yes, thank you. Look, both of you said at some stage that this is much needed dwelling accommodation. I'd really ask what evidence you have of that, not generally that there's a need for additional housing generally. I think that's quite clear, but what evidence have you got that this specific form of housing is actually needed? Why that's important is partly because of the questions we've just had, because it is that analysis and that proposition is driving an argument for a fair few discretionary items on car parking, on dwelling mix, for example, on amenity. Some of these apartments, some of these units, if they were apartments, would be undersized. So this is an important distinction at this point in time. What evidence is there that this is actually a much needed form of housing in this form, this specific form?
We've seen a number of projects, other co-living projects recently come to the planning system and come to a point of development approval. Charles Street, North Perth, Stirling Street in Perth, in the city of Vincent.
There's one in Canning Bridge precinct as well.
Where the Sydney Quarter project on Newcastle Street in West Perth, city of Vincent, as well as the recent approval at the Wool Stores, which had a component of co-living. Hearing from clients on other projects, it is still proving challenging to get build to sell residential apartment projects to stack up and proceed to construction. A lot of these projects are being revisited and alternate forms of accommodation are being pursued. Student accommodation is another market sector that I think has historically been undersupplied in Perth. There's been a large number of student accommodation proposals, some of which have recently been completed, some of which are in planning or have planning approval. So I think broadly, having these alternate forms of accommodation really caters to the market and the breadth of our community that's out there who are really looking for somewhere to live that best suits their stage in life. And I think these more innovative forms are then relieving the demand on existing or traditional housing stock, because it allows for people who maybe they have a fly in, fly out. That's their mode of deployment. So to have a co-living option for someone like that, for example, someone who has a contract-based employment. Sure as to where they'll be in 6 months' time or 12 months' time, to be able to take up a tenancy in a co-living project such as this and have a shorter stay duration. I think that would cater to that sort of demand.
So
Can I
we can-
just,
Sorry, we can,
before you go on, I think your client would like to supplement that response. Over to you, James.
Thank you. I was just going to say specifically here in Freo, we would believe that half, if not, 60% of them would be taken up by Defence Force individuals that would be hypothetically living on a ship or a submarine for 3 to 6 months, and then they would come back onshore. And we're not necessarily talking about all of the families, even though we have offered, a selection of 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms. The majority of those individuals are probably 20 to 26 and are generally single at that moment in life as well. So I would say specifically this one would be dedicated, the word's not dedicated, but I think it would be highly attractive to Defence Force personnel.
Thank you. Back to you.
that partly answers the question, actually, because we can make up all sorts of categories of people who might be living there. The question is how many of them are there? Now, clearly, there's a bunch of students that we can say, well, there's a measurable number of students that you can cater for, and there's plenty of work that's done on that. The question is, and there's other people at different stages of their life where life can be put into a suitcase, their whole possessions can be put into a suitcase, which is essentially what you're catering for. Now, the question is how many of them are there? I guess in this case, the Defence Force answer is not a bad one. The question is how many of those are going to be applying to this? The danger is that we don't get that take up that you're looking for, and these by de facto become substandard permanent accommodation, which is not, I don't think would be it's a question for the city that I don't think that would be an outcome that anybody would want.
And certainly not in terms of the design.
Could I just query before you answer, are you querying the appropriateness of the land use here, or
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
can you respond to that?
I mean, this has been designed specifically to cater to that segment of the market, which is people who are not at a point of seeking to live here for an extended period of time, people who perhaps don't have a car or don't have the same amount of belongings into one of these units. I think the question perhaps goes to the strength of the business case for this as an operating model, which I'll answer by the fact that it's gone to the expense of preparing this project and taking it to this point of planning. We've done so recently at the Stirling Street example, which was approved by this panel earlier this year. To me, suggests that the business case is strong and robust enough that we would not be applying for this if there wasn't a market for this, specifically a market and a cohort of our community who would live here. Otherwise, this would be designed as a build to sell or build to rent apartment building. Same design considerations that the residential design codes for apartments has, whereas this is specifically designed for cohort of our community.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think we are done with questions for you at the minute. Moving now to invite questions to the local government officers. We've got Chloe Johnston with us today from the City of Fremantle. I'm going to hand first to Councillor Van Dawson. Councillor Van Dawson, any questions of the city officers?
Not from me, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to ask that same question about the hierarchy in the scheme and the issue of whether we should give significantly greater deference to what's in the site-specific requirements as opposed to a generality in the scheme?
So Schedule 7 is the site-specific requirements. So it gets really detailed. It sets out specific heights. This particular site has got 2 different sets of criteria. And the element that talks about needing design excellence to get that additional height is a very small corner of the site. So when you look at those initiatives, I'm not completely surprised that the applicant hasn't opted to go down that path, because the incentives to get that height, the trade-off isn't there. So if you aren't meeting those requirements, clause 481, specifically in the scheme, to enable the panel or the decision maker to consider whether varying it is appropriate for the context. And it sets out those tests that look at the building height and the surrounding developments, the amenity impact. So that clause 481 is completely appropriate to use if they are seeking discretion against those site-specific requirements.
Questions from other panel members?
Thank you. Yes, just following on from the previous questions. An operational management plan, would you see that being of benefit in this situation and therefore an additional condition of approval?
Yeah, look, I think it's reasonable to request one. There are waste management plans and things that they've already provided, and acoustic management, but an operational management plan might bring it all together.
It brings together
some of those other minor,
brings together the highlights and also the day-to-day aspects of it. Okay, thank you for that answer. Again, just following up on this issue of built form adaptability, which seems to be, you know, of a benefit and lead to some future sustainable outcomes. But obviously, following on from Member Syme's questioning, there are obviously further considerations that the city would need to take. And so my anticipation would be that if that were to be the case, there would be a change of use development application for this, and then all the rigour that you've applied to this would be applied to that. Would that be your anticipation too?
Correct. It would be a change of land use. The apartment codes would come into play as well. So the applicant would need to demonstrate probably some changes to the floor plan, which the design review panel did request that they have a look at that through the process, and the applicant advised that there is ways to be able to combine some of those units and the way they're laying out the servicing, that it might be possible to convert later on. But yes, it would need to go through the DA.
Thank you for that. And then in relation to condition 24, which talks to either lot amalgamation and in brackets 5 lots, and then or alternatively a legal agreement for 2 lots, could you just explain to me why there is that difference, or perhaps there shouldn't be that difference?
There shouldn't be that difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so can we take therefore as an administrative correction, perhaps presiding member, I leave it up to your discretion, but thank you for that. And then just my final question, there was some reference by a previous presenter from the community that they felt there had been a difference in the calculation for the parking shortfall at the point that this development application went to advertising and what now appears to be in the RAR. Could you provide some comment on that, please?
Look, I'm not sure what document they might be. They may be referring to the difference between the applicant's document and our RAR. When we release something for advertising, we don't release an assessment as such.
Right.
We just flag that there are discretions on parking and provide the applicant's documentation.
Right, but we are now agreed that the shortfall is as per the RAR.
There is a significant shortfall.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, presiding member.
Yes, I had an initial query when I first read this as to why SVP 7.2 was not applied, and I understand that now. It goes to a wider question, I suppose, and this is sort of a policy question. How much thinking through has the city done on co-living developments and their impact? And I think if you've got a one-off, as in the one which is recently approved, that's okay. You can say, well, it's just a one-off. If you got a second one, then you're starting, you know, a third one, you're starting to get sort of a pattern and a whole land use class, which it has a set of circumstances which are unusual. And my observation is this has been assessed sort of as a residential development and sort of as a short stay hotel development, and there's a sort of it's in between because there's a lot of discretion on parking and so on, which you normally ask the question if it was a hotel has been sort of flagged away and so that's okay because it's the same sort of land use. And the question really is how much thinking through is the city done to think about what the effect locally and on the community of having for a moderate length of time, a large number of people who essentially have their whole possessions in a suitcase because that's essentially what you're catering for. And they might be for positive reasons, as it were. That might be for students, or it might be employment if it's defence personnel and so on. It may be for largely more negative reasons. It might be for family breakup, or just got out of prison or something like that. Now, as I say, if that's a small number, that's easy. But if it's a larger cohort, then the question is how much was the city done on the effect that this this proposal might have, but also as a land use class generally. A bit unfair here. You're sort of forced to make things up as you go along, and that's okay. But as a one or two projects, but as a land use class, it becomes a whole question in itself.
So I will clarify through the chair, the land use is being applied for. There is a hotel being proposed and a residential building. So there is a distinction between the land uses proposed. In terms of a planning framework for these co-living proposals, we're not alone in not necessarily having one. It's probably something that's emerged quite quickly and in probably something we should have caught on to a bit earlier as a planning profession in WA, given the popularity of them over East. It is something at state level that they are aware of. Co-living and student housing have similar problems, but they've also got a lot of benefits as well. The city is about to embark on a new planning scheme, and this conversation about housing typologies is really key for us. So we've got a lot of large homes, we've got some apartments, but we need more density in the city centre, and the city has recently done a city plan, so some strategic thinking about what the city centre needs, and it's really evident it needs people. And as a tourism town and a hospitality town where a lot of visitors come to Fremantle, we need staff to service those. Quite often they are international staff, they might be here for the summer months, and trying to get housing for them is difficult. We've got camping issues and all sorts of things that happen as a result. So in terms of a land use, the planning framework probably doesn't deal with it nice and neatly, but as a need, we see that diversity of housing is really important for this part of Fremantle.
Thank you. Good answer.
Good answer. Yeah. Anything else from you?
No.
Chloe, just a couple from me. So there were comments made by a previous presenter and through submissions that relate to community benefit. Is there anything in the planning framework that applies to this site that mandates demonstrable community benefit in the traditional sense of the word in exchange for the exercise of discretion?
No, there isn't in our scheme.
And then condition 7 relates to approval of the final details of external materials, finishes and colours. I assume the building permit process is where you lock that detail in, but how do you manage future changes to those elements as part of ongoing maintenance or upgrades in the future?
Look, it would depend on the scale of those changes and whether or not it needed a development approval or not. If it's ongoing maintenance, it's very likely it wouldn't need a DA. If the applicant or the landowner decided to completely change the look of the building, then it might well need a DA.
All right, thank you for that. Unless there are any other questions for Chloe, I think it's time that we move to the report. We have a report in front of us that recommends approval of the application subject to conditions. I would like to seek a seconder for that recommendation. Does any member wish to move the recommendation for approval?
I'll move the recommendation with the administrative change.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. Anyone wish to second? Thank you, Councillor Van Dorst. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you. The officers mentioned our strategic plan, the City of Fremantle strategic plan. And I think that's a very important place to start with any planning application. And it's very clear that Fremantle is a tourism town. It is a university city. It has activities such as AUKUS coming from in terms of need, but it's also a creative industries town, which has a very strong focus on the blue economy. And when I say creative industries, I'm talking about the high-tech industries and the like. And so there is actually an anticipation of a need for a very significant diversity of accommodation in Fremantle. And the strategic plan is very clear about that. And I think when both this part of the scheme was written and also subsequently 2 strategic plans have been written in that time, the concern or the greatest fear was that we were not going to get that diversity of housing. We were going to get a singularity of apartments that back in the day when this scheme was written were too large and very much 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. And our concern in the scheme was very much about how are we going to get hospitality workers in the city? How are we going to get essential workers, nurses, police, fireys, etc., into the city? How are we going to get all of those other people into the city? So the scheme, as it's written, actually encourages, and in fact, in some places emphasises the need for much smaller apartments and the like. There was also emphasis on the need for build to rent, and also for the hope of student accommodation as well, subsequently called, student hotels, and now marketed as co-living, if you like. I mean, they are different a little bit, but they're also the same. So I think it does actually fulfil what the scheme and the strategic plan have been looking to achieve. I just wanted to touch on the issue of the heights. When the scheme was written, you can see the intent of the heights on that particular intersection, that each of the corners was, if you like, encouraged to be a little bit more landmark quality. And that is why the additional height requirements were on those corners. Now, I've spoken to other owners of the corner sites previously who've come to the city to sort of say, well, this is what we're thinking about in terms of the site. And I can tell you that they are completely underwhelming in terms of creating a landmark. So that sense is that there is still out there a sense of, would 1 story be enough? Would a 1-story commercial highway commercial kind of development be enough on those corner sites? So it's actually very challenging. And I wanted to say that because the notion of design quality, I know we're not necessarily using that as the core of the assessment, but I think it is worth actually looking at that in terms of the additional heights. Design quality is not skin deep. It is for the full depth of the building. And there are a bunch of things that this building does, which I think should be commended. One of them is, for example, the site actually has a multifaceted way of turning around the corner. And we have seen too many buildings built where every last millimetre of that site is utilised, and we get a building that is designed by a road engineer's notion of how a building should turn the corner, rather than a formal way of turning the corner. They've actually widened the footpaths effectively in the areas of Queen Victoria Street where extra lanes are. Footpaths are quite narrow. So they've been very conscious about the public realm, but also very conscious of the way in which the building turns around the corner. And I think that is a very important part of the proposal. Another important part is when the scheme was written that talked about activated street frontages. That was always going to be a challenge on this side of Queen Victoria Street because the old wool store building was never going to activate the street and the like, but they have taken the opportunity to find land uses that in particular help activate the corner. And I think that's also very important. They've also gone to the extent of actually creating if you like, a commercial version of a public amenity by having a rooftop bar. So it actually attracts the members of the public to this area in an area that has, historically been a drive-through car yard environment. So it is adding to those elements, but just the general articulation of the building, the respect to the Wool Stores building in the red brick and the keeping it sort of fairly simple gridded form, and then being able to create an architectural expression in the new bit on the corner, breaking the building up physically, again, is a design quality element that I would commend. The extra height being set back over the bit of the building that is next to the Wool Stores. Again, another design element that isn't always included in every design that we see. So there are absolutely design quality elements to this building. With respect to parking, the scheme, I would suggest very strongly, and I know I've heard the city officers talk about this, is that it's really out of date in terms of being able to deal with these hotels and the like. I think this is different in a sense that to build a basement on that site's actually very difficult. It's limestone in that area, so they've actually gone a long way. But to comply with the scheme as it is currently written would have required another 2 layers of parking. So, you know, floor 1 and floor 2 would have had to have been car parking for this. However, it does, you know, it has gone to the extent of providing a good level of parking, significantly more than the previous hotel that we approved just the other day, which had 0. I also look at it and go, they've thought about the adaptability. They've put in storerooms in the basement that could easily become a residential building. And I think it is important from sustainability and design quality that there is adaptability. And I can see, subject obviously to a future planning application, that if this model is not the model that should go forward, or they want to change half of the units or a quarter of the units, that there is adaptability in the process to do that. So I'll rest my case and commend this proposal to you.
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. Councillor Van Dawson, our seconder, do you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to the presenters and the submitters who were there today, and it was good to hear from all of you the additional information, and thank you to the city officers for your reporting, which I thought was very well laid out and provided us with a very clear assessment of the key planning considerations and merits of the proposal. And I will be supporting the officers' recommendation today with everything considered. I do appreciate the concerns that were in the submission, but in this, I just think working through the proposal itself, yeah, I do feel like the merits do outweigh the potential impacts. I think the planning merits have been covered well today in the RA and in everyone's presentations and the feedback from the city as well. Thank you, Councillor Sullivan and Chloe, for talking to our strategic plan. I do feel like this land use, this mix of land use even is needed in our city, and I think they will function well together. The residential building element itself, yeah, it has been, I agree, it is needed in our city, and we do need this diversity of housing and the smaller type. And I appreciate the design that's gone into the units to maximise, whilst they're small, compact, I think they've been designed well to maximise the amenity for residents, with maximising access to sunlight and also the natural ventilation and the layout of each unit. I think it will work quite well. Yeah, the key discretionary items here, the key considerations for me, certainly the height form. I agree with the city's assessment in the RA that I think this does warrant discretion. The building is consistent with the height of buildings in the area in terms of the heritage building as well, and supported by the Heritage Council. I think the design is complementary to joining form. And whilst the 6-storey significantly higher than the building to the north, I do think there's sufficient setback from that. I feel like it has been designed well to respond to its context. Looking at discretion on height, I always look at context, the design itself, the merits of the proposal, but of course impacts on amenity and neighbours I think is key. And just given this height impact is with overshadowing and such would be to the south, which is not I think with no residential uses, I think I'm satisfied with that. There's no real overshadowing impacts, and there's no overlooking into any sensitive areas, direct overlooking into sensitive areas of the adjoining properties. So I'm comfortable with that height discretion. I do agree with the applicant in terms of the community benefit put forward. I think the activation of this site alone is a huge community benefit with the active uses, commercial uses on the ground floor, I think is good, and the public art contribution in itself. And yeah, I do think that just the design has really considered its content quite well and its neighbours and responded to it appropriately. Parking is the other big one. I'm comfortable with this one just based on previous decisions and precedent. There is provision for all the uses, which is great. We've had proposals come to us, hotels and such with no parking, and co-living developments with next to no parking. So I really appreciate that there actually is parking in this. And whilst a shortfall, I think, its location does warrant it with the high frequency transport, the location of public parking nearby, and some on site. The traffic and access, I think has been really well managed. I think that restricted access arrangement is great. The restricted left in and left out, I think will really help with the traffic flow and management in the area. And the other one, I guess the waste management is always one that comes up, and I think this one has been well done. It's always want to see it on site. Waste, the bin store, the location and the waste management, I think, just to minimise impacts on the surrounding streets. And yes, definitely do support an additional condition requiring an operational management plan, which I understand one of the other, I'll leave with the other panel members to propose as well, understand. I think that will just give a little bit more comfort and clarity around how particularly the residential building will be managed, and provide the city with some to the satisfaction of the city and for the duration. I think I'd like to see in there just to confirm there's some sort of management of that type of use in the building. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Other panel members?
Presiding member. I thank the mover and the seconder for their thorough consideration of this, and appreciate their local knowledge. It's certainly assists and supports the recommendation from the officers through the RAR. I too support the motion before us. I recognise that there were a number of objections, 35 objections to this. It is a challenging corner site. It's got multiple frontages, and I think it has been handled exceptionally well. Some of the objections referred to the heritage, but I defer to the experts at the Heritage Council and their opinion on this matter, which they felt was minor, and which can be controlled through conditions relating to the upper level setback, and their overall support. I follow through with that. There were comments around safety and pedestrian safety particularly, but the engineering work has shown that there's adequate sight lines and access and egress controls. So I don't believe that pedestrian safety is an issue here. I think there's been a sufficient response to sustainability with a 4-star Green Star commitment, and also not to underestimate the fact that the architects have looked at future-proofing the built form and some level of adaptability and transition to either alternate market sectors or to potentially some permanent accommodation over time. And we must remember that this area near the port is very much in transition and changing, and will continue to do over the next few decades. So I think it's important that a development here has that view to the future. As mentioned by the seconder, waste management is often a thing where we come unstuck, but there is a private waste management plan here which the city has assessed. There's also, and whilst the port remains in its current form, an assessment of risk management, which looks to the future well-being of future occupants, but also without, this development doesn't impact the activities of the port. Rather, it takes that on as yet another challenge and deals with it adequately. The design review panel, again, another group of experts in design, support this as a well-planned and well-resolved building. There are some recommendations for some minor additional design considerations for materials and landscape, which are covered by the conditions. All the land uses are contemplated in this zone, and I think they do. This development does meet the objectives of the mixed use zone, noting that ground floor residential in this area is acceptable where it contributes to an active public domain, which I believe that this does. And it also meets requirements of the local planning policies as they exist at the moment for the precinct. In considering the use of discretion and the seeking of an additional 5.5 metres above height, I accept the applicant's explanation as to why they've gone with the more general clause 4.8.1 of the local planning scheme, and their justification for that, given the extent of the development over a number of different lots and the different aspects which under the more specific rules apply to those different lots. I think this approach presents a much more cohesive and well-resolved design. Yes, technically above the height that is envisaged, but it's not inconsistent with the design of nearby development. There has been consideration of overlooking and overshadowing, and there is an adequate setback and a transition, as Councillor Sullivan referred to, between the heritage and this build. So I'm comfortable with the use of discretion in that respect. Similarly, discretion in terms of parking shortfall. This is a city centre location. It's near bus and rail. So the public transport provision is excellent. There's also some public parking nearby. There's also bike parking provision, and there's a car share provision. And I do note, as the mover and seconder has elaborated, that the city's overall goal is to reduce parking reliance upon private motorised vehicles in the inner city through their integrated transport strategy. So I think that this aligns with that, and therefore parking has been provided, but there is a shortfall. But in this location, I believe it is acceptable. Overall, I think that this will rejuvenate the site and facilitate an active public realm along Victoria Street as part of a higher density residential quarter, which the city Fremantle 2029 strategic plan really wants, and it's a part of their transformational moves, their strategy for transformational moves. So I do support. I would, however, like to make an amendment and introduce a new condition. My draft words are: prior to occupation, an operational management plan to be submitted to and approved by the City of Fremantle, and thereafter the development shall be operated in accordance with the approved operational management plan to the satisfaction of the City of Fremantle.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that amendment? Seconded, Consan. Used.
Only just very quickly, we do have a diversity of uses here with the residential building and the hotel, and I think we've got a number of transient occupants. I think there are some day-to-day management aspects which can be covered by the operational management plan, which sit outside those other management plans for waste and acoustics and so forth. The officer has been supportive, and the applicant has suggested that this would be a normal course of events. So I don't think it places any undue impact on them, but I think it provides something which gives some level of clarity and certainty, and certainly something which other members of the community in Fremantle can look towards to ensure that it is operated appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Simon.
Yes, look, similar sentiments. I think given the nature of the land use here and the intentionally transient nature of all of the occupants here, I think an operational management plan is appropriate.
Thank you. Do any other members wish to speak for or against the amendment? No, let's put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Member Hyde, anything with that?
I've concluded. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Sam, do you wish to speak?
Look, there's very little else to say. I think the Councillor Sullivan and other panel members have really said it in considerable, I mean, it has been well articulated. In brief, I think from an architectural point of view, this is very good development. I think it fits into the city framework in a very skillful way. It is a prominent site, in fact, and I think will become more prominent with this building on it. And I think this is will be a very fine building to form a corner element to this particular part of the city. I think the requirements for this level of accommodation and this amount of accommodation in this site has been handled quite skillfully again. From an architectural point of view, each of the individual units have good amenity. I don't think I can see any compromises or shortfalls in the actual amenity of the apartments and the general format itself. I think as a mix of uses and as an integration of those uses, I think it's been quite well handled. So from an architectural point of view, I think this is quite outstanding. I did, in the nature of my questions, have some questions about the land use, the extent of it, how this would evolve over time. But I think those questions for me have been satisfactorily resolved. I think the fact that we can see firm demand for this, the fact that there is a logical transition to some other land use as a backstop, which is I think probably unlikely, but it is there. I think is good. I think because of the nature of the land use, there's some of the things which have been flagged as discretion, not discretionary items at all. For example, parking and so on. I think that's been quite well argued as being satisfactory. Similarly, heritage, we have quite firm advice from Heritage Council that the heritage issues have been well addressed. I think the height issues similarly have been well addressed. So I think from an overall point of view, this level of accommodation at this time is important. I think the nature of the changing economy of Fremantle, this will respond to an emerging need, and I think it's been exceptionally well handled from an urban design and architectural point of view. So I think it can be supported.
I am also happy to support the recommendation. Before speaking to the substantive motion, though, I'd like to move an amendment to condition 7 to include the wording: prior to occupation, the approved materials, colours and finishes shall be implemented to the satisfaction of the City of Fremantle and maintained for the life of the development unless otherwise approved by the City. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Member Hyde. Look, the reason is the City has the ability to approve minor changes, and through a further development application has the ability to approve more significant changes to that palette. But I think the added wording just gives visibility to the ability of the City to approve deviations from the approved schedule in future, should this be required. This can sometimes be challenged by members of the community who feel that materials have changed. This just makes it very clear that the City is able to do that. Does any other member, do you wish to speak?
I concur with you.
Any other member wish to speak for or against this addition? No, all those in favour? Carried unanimously. My view is this proposal represents a great opportunity to enhance an underdeveloped site in this part of Fremantle. It's a strategic location. It's also a great opportunity to provide much needed residential accommodation in the city and a different housing model that caters to a specific type of community need. On the issue of demand, it's my view that it's not up to us to make calls on whether there is demand for the land use. It is up to us, however, to make a call on appropriateness of land use. And I'm of the view the land use is appropriate for the site. Certainly, I would battle to mount a reasonable planning argument that it is not. I note the concerns that have been raised about the appropriateness of this panel approving a development that's larger than envisaged under the current planning framework. I respect those views, but the fact is this panel has the discretion to approve this development. If it sees merit in doing so, it does not need to be in exchange for any defined community benefit. It's my view the community of Fremantle will benefit by and large from the high quality and respectful development of an underutilised site for a much needed residential use. In terms of planning merit, I think the city's report has very clearly and comprehensively outlined how the proposal meets the objectives of the overarching planning framework and has provided solid justification for the discretion being sought. The current planning framework, both at a state level and local government level doesn't adequately cater for co-living yet. It's quite a unique use with different operational and built form requirements to normal apartments. It therefore follows that the proposal will not easily fit into the development requirements for standard residential use. If we are to require strict adherence to the current framework, will effectively prevent or discourage a great land use, which increases both dwelling provision and housing diversity. I do believe that the state is looking at the moment on the planning framework to deal with co-living, and I know individual local governments are also looking at it in terms of introducing land use permissibility specific definitions in their schemes to cater for this. It is a growing building typology or residential typology, and to try and make it fit into the existing planning framework is just going to discourage it. In relation to Heritage Council, city's heritage experts are comfortable that any minor adverse impact on the adjoining listed place will be mitigated through the upper level setback in the architectural detail of the proposal. Both the Heritage Council and the city's heritage experts support the proposal subject to conditions, and these have been recommended by the city in the Design Advisory Committee has reviewed the proposal 4 times, generally supportive of the proposal, considering it to be a high quality design, where minor improvements to the design have been captured as conditions of approval where appropriate. Just to close off, car parking, proposed number of bays I think have been well justified by the city, using both solid planning rationale and evidence-based arguments. The parking requirements of an inner city hotel and co-living housing model are different to those of standard residential accommodation and to hotels which aren't so well located in proximity to public transport and localised attractions and amenities. So I will be supportive. With that, I will hand back to Councillor Sullivan in case there is anything you wish to briefly add.
Thank you. I would like to close by just commenting a little bit further on the hierarchy of the scheme and the way in which I think this decision can be framed in relation to the scheme. It's quite appropriate for a scheme to provide incentives in it to achieve particular outcomes where that's desirable from a urban design perspective or a land use perspective or a quality of design perspective, and the scheme does that. And it is also appropriate for there to be a degree of flexibility in schemes generally anyway, and I certainly support that. So in this instance, I guess we are making a decision which is in part based on the specific requirements for the corner part of the site, and in part expanding those across the remaining of the site, utilising the fact that there are taller buildings on the opposite side of the road. I do also, though, want to say that I still maintain that view that the hierarchy of this scheme is important. In this precinct, taller buildings were designed into the scheme on the opposite side of the road, and it shouldn't just be an automatic assumption that therefore every site can go to the tallest height that was permitted in the scheme, because that would be a nonsense of going through and doing a site-by-site assessment. But in this instance, because of the quality and the form and the land uses and the way they've arranged the public realm and the public attractiveness of the building, I think it is appropriate for us to leapfrog from the site-specific incentive of the corner to utilise the more general part of the scheme to provide that final decision across the whole site. And I think that balancing between the two is an important part of why we have decision-making bodies, as opposed to just leaving it to a planning assessment. And I'm happy to use my discretion in that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. We're now going to move to a vote on this item. We're dealing with a recommendation for approval with conditions as amended, including the administrative amendment picked up in the moving of the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item 4, Form 2 DAP applications. There are none. For City of Fremantle, Section 31 SAT reconsiderations, also none. With that, I thank Councillor Ingrid Van Dorsen and Councillor Andrew Sullivan for their attendance and
Need a break.
While we are changing the town of Cambridge, we are just going to take a quick break. There's a procedural motion by Member Hyde and seconded by Member Syme. It was very easy to get out of the room.
You.
And vote on it. Welcome back, everybody, to this meeting of Metro Inner Assessment Panel. Moving now on to Part C, Town of Cambridge. I would like to welcome Councillor Kate Marlowe and Deputy Mayor Ben Hayes, our local government DAP members for the Town of Cambridge, to the panel. Item 1, declaration of due consideration. Panel members need to have considered all the documentation within Part C of the agenda and the Part C related information that was uploaded to the website. Could I please confirm by a show of hands that members have considered all information? Thank you. That is unanimous. Item 2, disclosures of interest. Could I check with our local government members whether this application has been before you at a council briefing or meeting? No. Excellent, thank you. I haven't received any other disclosures of interest. Do any members wish to make disclosures in relation to this? Moving then on to item 3, our Form 1 application for Cambridge, lots 4 and 5, number 10 and 12, Abbotsford Street, West Leederville, an 8-storey residential development, DAP number 25/02939. We have 2 presenters on this item today, Philippe Soto from Space Collective and Matthew Kane from Planning Solutions, both speaking in support of the application. We usually allow 3 minutes for presentations, but I believe these applicants have requested 5 minutes each. And because there are only these presenters on the item, I have agreed to an extension. Mr. Ken Perry has also made a written submission, which we have all had the benefit of reading. To the presenters, we have read your written documentation, so I encourage you to focus on the parts of your presentation you'd like to get across in your 5 minutes. I will put into time each time. Your 5 minutes will start when you are ready.
PDF or presentation. Where I am. Good morning, members of the panel. Thank you for the opportunity to present our proposal for 1012 Abbotsford Street in West Leederville. The proposal we present today results from a comprehensive contextual study. It integrates essential components of the local urban fabric and articulates a forward-looking vision for the area. Through the design review process, several areas for improvement were identified to ensure our proposal appropriately responds to a neighborhood, which is undergoing build form transition and moving on the path to becoming an area where well-considered medium-density development close to public transport can be delivered. Following our third meeting, a few standing items remain, which we worked through with the planning team to ensure we were receiving the full support. The street was a crucial consideration. Our proposal is committed to delivering a ground floor experience that allows the community within the building to connect with the street, while reimagining the traditional front yards features of the area's cottages. As mentioned earlier, there were a few items that we still needed to address as part of the design. The first one is the staircase, which is not considered a habitable space and therefore does not require a screening. We believe it actually contributes not only to the building texture, but also to the activation of the street. Additional information was also requested concerning access to the parking levels. An interconsistent is proposed to facilitate a smooth and straightforward experience for visitors to the building. Communal spaces on level 1 were reconfigured to provide a well-considered amenity for residents while still maintaining privacy for those living on each level. In regards to the privacy and overlooking, extensive design studies were provided to ensure no overlooking of privacy issues are created for the adjoining properties. Corner vision diagrams were a valuable tool in demonstrating our commitment to being a good neighbor. Finally, the internal communal space on level 1 was reconfigured to provide not only a more efficient layout, but also a more flexible communal area that can cater to different activities. In summary, our proposal before you today demonstrates that through good design and well-considered bulk and scale strategies, an 8-story development can successfully be integrated into the existing context. Given the strength of the proposal and the backing of the local design review panel, I respectfully request that to the members of the panel to endorse the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. You didn't even need your 3 minutes. Well done. We're going to move straight to Matthew's presentation, and then I think panel members will be able to ask you questions as an applicant if you're comfortable with that. Matthew, your time starts.
Fine. Thank you, presiding member. Good morning, members. Matthew Kane from Planning Solutions, acting on behalf of the landowner and proponent of the residential development. Pleased to be here today to talk in support of this application and acknowledge the town's recommendation for conditional approval of the proposal. As you've seen from Felipe's presentation, the development represents an excellent design outcome reflective of both the future development intent for West Level and as a design outcome considerate of the site. While some discretion is sought, we do consider the development consistent with the relevant considerations of the planning framework. Those elements seeking discretion are largely supported by the town, with the exception being the parking matter, which I'll address in this submission. Whilst we are pleased with the recommendation for approval, we do ask the town that the DAP members consider some modifications to the town's officer recommendation. I'll briefly just touch on these. In relation to condition 2, we just asked for some minor wording changes be included within the condition as it's proposed, and that's really just to build in an element of flexibility to the condition as currently proposed. In relation to condition 3, and this is in relation to parking, we request this condition be deleted. There was rationale provided, justification within the development application submission and in the RFI response provided to the town. But I'll just highlight my comments in relation to the request for the deletion. Whilst there is, I acknowledge a 2-bay shortfall to the R-code's acceptable outcomes, we'd say that there's appropriate rationale for this variation when you consider the framework that applies. Element objective 3.9.2 of the R-code's volume 2 states that car parking provision is appropriate to the location, with reduced provision possible in areas that are highly walkable and or have good public transport or cycle networks and or close to employment centres. As you'll see from the RA, numerous points the town acknowledges the site's location. We entirely agree with this analysis. The site is in immediate proximity to Leadville Station and West Leadville Station. There's a principal shared path for bikes and pedestrians to use adjoining both stations and these rail lines. The site is within the West Leadville Activity Centre, and as the RA describes, this is an area with excellent access to commercial, retail and community services. In addressing the variation to visitor parking provision, we don't consider that the town's RA actively reflects the element objective comments. It's our assessment that development aligns with the element objective and allows, therefore, a reduction in visitor parking, given the location is highly walkable, has excellent access to public transport, and is indeed in immediate proximity to employment opportunities. For these reasons, I'd ask for condition 3 to be deleted. In relation to condition 5, again, some minor changes, primarily removing reference to the separate non-planning related legislation and just some deletion of duplication of work superfluous. In relation to condition 10, and I apologise, there was a typo in my deputation summary, but my last comments in relation to condition 10, again, this is just asking for some minor wording added to the condition to allow a level of flexibility in lieu of the development being developed specifically in accordance with the plans and the materials that are shown. There is always some element of change that may occur through the construction process. We'd ask for that to be considered. You have before you an excellent development, something that's largely consistent with the framework that is applicable to the site. We therefore ask that the DAP adopt the recommendation subject to that. We've got Felipe here and Ryan Henderson as well as client developer representative.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start with Councillor Barlow. Do you have any questions of the applicant team?
I do support what you're saying about the public transport, etc. But unfortunately, human behaviour, too many people are using the cars, especially those that are coming to visit. So that is a concern, but I do support very strongly how close it is to the public transport, the railway and the buses, etc.
Councillor, do you have a question?
Well, that's what I'm saying to him, that I'm not in support of that there's not sufficient car parking there for the visitors.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, questions? Questions from the applicant, from Member Hyde?
Thank you. Just picking up on the parking and the request to delete condition 3. Can you just give me an overall view of the parking provision? My reading was that you actually have more than the minimum parking anyway in the development.
Yeah, I can talk to it in terms of that. Yes, there is more residential parking than the minimum requirement. And through the design process, we've increased the visitor provision from 3 bays initially to 4, based on some technical advice from the city regarding the waste area. So we've managed within the existing footprint, without changing anything else, adding an additional visitor bay. In terms of parking, visitor parking provision, I think one of the things that has happened recently with the DAP on another matter, they've acknowledged that visitors don't come at all hours of the day. They're generally targeted at specific times in the evenings and on the weekends. Our assessment is that at those times, there is a significant amount of parking if there were to be 4 bays occupied to accommodate surplus on the street and within the surrounding area, Cambridge Street, Railway Parade, and there is, as I identified in my note, a car park about 90 metres or less from the site that has an excess of 50 bays within it. So we feel that there is adequate provision within the surrounding area, and therefore we're consistent.
Just as a clarification then, following on from Member Hyde's question, condition 3 currently seeks to reallocate resident parking to visitor bays, and you're seeking to delete that requirement, and you want to retain the number of residential bays and go for the shortfall in visitor bays. Is that correct?
And just my last one was just a point of clarification. You'd originally said condition 9, you wanted to add some words, but it's actually condition 10. Is that right? No. I just wanted to be clear I'd heard you correctly.
To clarify, thank you. Yes.
No problem. Thank you.
Condition 5, can you outline for us what the problem with including reference to environmental protection noise regulations 1997? It's not an unusual requirement in conditions such as these.
I think there's probably 2 things I'd say. One, it's not planning related legislation, and it's been consistently noted by the DAP in meetings I've been at only recently. I think yourself, Mr. Syme, that on planning related legislation, there is a requirement to comply with it as a standard anyway. So including in a condition, it has no merit or purpose. The requirement there for that management plan, which is then the second part of the condition, it seems superfluous in my view, in that you've already got to prepare an updated one, submit it back to the town, and then comply with that at all times as part of paragraph 2 of the condition. So the rest of it doesn't seem to have any benefit.
Sorry, can I just pick up that question?
Sure.
If that's okay. And I might perhaps ask some advice from the town as to the reason for that being included, given the commentary just now, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, it is a fairly.
We might move to questions of the town staff in a sec. So can I get Matthew to expand on that, and then we'll go to the town staff more generally.
Sure. Sorry, I wasn't sure there was a specific question beyond the query to the town, in what I'd already responded to Mr. Syme. Was there something else relating to that?
Is your question for the town?
Directed to
All right.
the officers.
Okay. Are there any other questions for the applicant team before we move on? I have no questions. Are there any other food? All right. We are very fortunate to have Ahmed Afghan and Nick Bucker from the town of Cambridge. Over to you to answer.
Yeah, so just in relation to around this environmental, facilities 5.
Yeah.
Could you please just provide some guidance to us as to the reasons for this included, and I guess address some of what the applicant has?
Yeah, sure. In these mixed use areas, a lot of these developments are coming to fruition and completion now. We are running into issues of noise pollution, impact the amenity of surrounding residential properties. So it's a very standard condition that goes on most of these larger applications, that be submitted. I believe I mean the report, there wasn't much in way of a report submitted initially.
Furthermore, the town's health.
Can I just ask you to speak up a bit? I'm battling.
Right. Furthermore, the town's health department actually advised the town that it is required basically as a cross measure to just cross check before the building permit is cleared. The clearance of conditions is always one of the last issues for developments, and just before that, we want to see that as a documented condition to clear it basically from planning. That was our.
Just follow up with that. So generally, picking up on the applicant's comment, and we've dealt with this a lot through similar applications, whether you include the requirement for compliance with the noise regs or not, it's got to comply with the noise regs. So you've added it into a planning condition. You've included a planning condition that requires adherence to a separate set of legislation, which is uncommon. And I'm trying to flesh out why is that. Have you had issues in the past where just requiring adherence to the noise regs through a normal course of matters is not enough? Or
yeah, so that part of it relating to the noise regulations could have been included as an advice note because it is separate legislation. You are correct. But in terms of getting a thorough acoustic report submitted to deal with some of these concerns that we had through our assessment, we would still want a condition through that at the permit stage. But I guess a reference to separate legislation could be referred to in an advice note and not as a condition. It's not enforceable under planning.
So then, as per the applicant's suggestion, that reference in that condition to the noise regs is superfluous. Do you agree with?
Well, we did. They are required to comply with those, and I guess that comes down to it's an issue we're trying to get the jump on rather than post-monitoring issues that come up. But it's dealing with them at that stage that they don't come up at all. So
there is another issue. There was no noise modeling noted on the noise management plan that the applicant provided, which the health department let us know, which is why we went back and basically conditioned it as part of the assessment for the health department to carry it out before the building permit, basically.
All right, back to you, Deputy Mayor.
No further comments. Yeah.
Councillor Barlow, any questions of the staff? Other members, questions of the town staff?
Yes. Could I just get you to repeat that? Are you saying that when this application came in, there was no noise modelling? Could I refer that back to the applicant, please, presiding member?
There was an acoustic report provided within the DA submission and then a separate noise management plan for SPP 5.4.
Right. And the acoustic recommendations were based upon noise modelling?
Yeah, it addressed basically it was prepared by Herring Storer, who are a standard acoustic specialist. And obviously, one thing I'd always note is you generally find that preliminary acoustic reports, because detailed construction, mechanical detail specifications aren't always provided, isn't as detailed, but notwithstanding, as you've mentioned, there is a requirement to comply with noise regs separately. So anything that's updated would be in relation to SPP 5.4, which is what we're recommending.
Yeah, and we indeed have an attachment which goes to that modelling. Okay. Don't think I've got a question then that follows on that. I'm fine, thank you.
Members, questions of the staff?
Yes, can we pursue the request for condition 3 to be deleted, please? The argument from the applicant is that there is sufficient car parking available at the times when parking will be required. What's your response to that?
Yeah, through our assessment, we're still not satisfied with the amount of parking. provided. We've done, there is risk of, that onto our amenities on the street, and we would like to see.
So what's the nature of that risk? How do you assess risk when you say there's a risk that it will?
Well, so you've got to
happen, but how do you assess that? What's the magnitude of it?
Well, it is, based on previous experience with these things, where you see 29 buildings go on a current single residential lot, and the amount of visitors in reality coming to a place where a lack of visitor parking has been provided, inevitably results in spill out into street parking, and that puts more pressure on the streets in these areas. So we've already got issues in these areas constantly with these things coming up through our range departments, dealing with those sorts of complaints and things from residents.
Can I just focus on what you just said there? You've already got issues, and obviously you've got some pressures that you're feeling. When do you experience those issues? Because I think the applicant specifically saying those pressures are generally during the day, because all those other businesses are open during the day, and at night, some of those, not all, but most of those close, and then that parking should free up. Can you comment on that?
Well, obviously, when it's not in business hours, it's not traffic, so the experience will be during the day when the traffic is increased, and I guess we would still prefer visitor parking to be, not located on the town's land, which will, if the 4 bays are taken for the 29 buildings, the 29 dwellings being constructed, even in the evening, it's going to spill out to our street. Whether or not it's extremely busy at that time, it's still the town believes it should be contained on site.
Yeah, it's just you haven't got any evidence. Any traffic counts and parking counts and so on to support that. I mean, for example, the clinic across the road that has specific opening times, which are within daytime hours. They're just not open before and after the event. So any parking that comes out of that, for example, will be specific to daylight hours.
Yes,
9 to 5. Just very short hours, as I recall. So have you got any parking count support for those properties?
Just wondering how that site across the road would relate to this development.
The question is the demand for street parking.
Yeah, okay, so the demand will obviously be less in those nighttime hours. I agree with that. I can't argue with that. But the number of bays provided for tenants exceeds what they're required, and they're would like to see 2 of those allocated to the visitor bays, whether or not they're off-peak and on-peak times. We obviously see a reduction in the impact on the amount of clients we get in the evening. Those bays across the road don't become available. It's still private land. Doesn't mean that visitors can just go and park there.
No. It's the street parking and the other parking, which is
it frees up. Yeah,
not saying that's available. It's your proposition is that there's demand on your street parking and on other parking, which you don't.
Yeah, the amount of there was no modelling done on this. This was a referral to our internal.
We did an internal referral to the Ranger Services, who noted that there has been significant amount of tickets within that zone, which is unprecedented for that kind of activity to occur. They didn't specify timeframes, but they were concerned about the parking shortfall being a long-term problem for the town, basically.
Okay. Any other questions for the town staff before we move to the report? No? Okay. Let's move to the report then. And in front of us, we have a recommendation for approval, subject some mover and seconder for that recommendation. Do I have a mover? Member Hyde, do I have a seconder? Mayor, thank you very much. Member Hyde, do you wish to speak?
Thank you. Notes up. Yes, I support this application. I think it satisfies the mixed use zone objectives of the planning scheme and is compliant with the draft structure plan, which will supersede one of the local planning policies 2.5. But in any case, I think it is generally consistent with the intent of local planning policy 2.5 for the strategic activity centre. It's also consistent with the objectives of the emerging centre zone under the draft planning scheme 2, which is just currently being advertised. So I think across the planning framework, this is an acceptable form of development and land use. I note that residential on the ground floor is not necessarily contemplated, but I think it is acceptable in this situation because it will provide some surveillance, passive surveillance, and some level of activity. It also provides for some streetscape enhancement. And I do note that the commercial development is not mandated in the planning framework. So I think it presents a diverse residential product in what is technically a transit orientated development precinct. Some discretion is required for height, plot ratio, landscape and visitor parking. In terms of height, I think the podium and tower design presents well to the street, provides a human scale at the street level. The R-code visual privacy measures are satisfied. There are oblique views that meet those element objectives. There's adequate setbacks at the upper level and certainly adequate separation between the configuration of the tower, the distances between the apartments there. And it's been demonstrated there's sufficient access to daylight. In terms of landscape, it provides 11 new trees, so I think that is of great benefit to not only the new residents but also in terms of the environment, increasing the tree canopy. I think it's very close to train stations and bus routes, and I'll come back to the parking in a second. And I do note the design review panel support for this. I think I would like to, however, make some amendments, and perhaps it would be easy to take them individually.
Yes, please.
My first amendment would be to condition 2, to add the words "or approved by the town."
Do I have a seconder for that amendment? Seconded, Member Syme. Do you wish to speak to it?
Just quickly, I think it allows some legibility of approval processes across a period of time when things are perhaps a little bit more than minor, but it still gives that ability to the town to continue to make those approvals consistent with what we decide today.
Thank you, Member Syme. Do you wish to speak?
Look, I think giving a degree of flexibility into the planning as it emerges towards design development, I think is important, and I think this achieves that.
Does any other member wish to speak to the amendment? I will briefly speak just to clarify. I don't think the wording is essential because the town has the ability to approve variations, but I'm happy to support the amendment because it just creates that visibility right up front that there is, because some people don't understand that the town has that ability. So I think it's good to have it in the conditions. I would support that. All right. Do you wish to close? No, that's good. Let's vote on that amendment. All those in favour? Carried unanimously.
Thank you. Amendment 2 relates to condition 10. Which again just adds some words of certainty unless otherwise approved.
Do I have a seconder for that? Member Syme, do you wish to speak?
It's the same as the previous issue, presiding member.
Does any other member wish to speak for or against that amendment? No? Okay, let's vote on it. All those in favour? Carried unanimously.
Thank you. My next amendment is to condition 5, and I would propose, sort of in keeping with the applicant's request, deletion of the reference in the first paragraph of condition 5 to the environmental noise regs, but maintaining reference to state planning policy 5.4. Oh, it's the second paragraph, pardon me. Deleting that reference to environmental noise protection regs. And the third paragraph, I would suggest moving to an advice note.
Thank you. Do I have a second for that amendment? Thank you, Member Syme.
It's a bit of a compromise, which we asked for, and the information we received from the city. I think it's a duplication in terms of the second paragraph, because the acoustics need to deal with that anyway, and the report that has currently been prepared, which was attachment 9, stipulates reference to those noise regulations. My reason for moving the third paragraph to an advice note is just that it follows through what the officers were saying, that they want a reminder there that, notwithstanding everything, that there are those regulations and considerations through the life of the development, and it's appropriate as an advice note.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak for or against that amendment? No? Let's put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously.
Thank you. And for the purpose of debate, I will make a further suggested amendment to delete condition 3.
Thank you. Do I have a second for that amendment? Member Syme, thank you.
I'm broadly comfortable with deleting condition 3 on the basis that I think, you know, as we understand and recognise, this site is in the middle of an activity area. It has access to, I think, possibly more than one train station, certainly lots of bus movement, and there is other public parking around. I note that the resident parking has been awarded more than would normally be the case. I think quite often when visitors come, there might be some arrangement perhaps between the household and the visitor to make a bay available for them. There are other opportunities to share that parking. And so I'm reasonably comfortable with that, given that there are at least 4 visitor bays already identified in the plan.
Member Syme, do you wish to speak to that?
Look, I acknowledge Abbotsford Street is a narrow street, and the parking there is challenging. But I think that is time specific. I think that the time of demand or peak demand for visitors will not coincide with that in general. And I think, given you already have 4 visitor bays, I think for general daylight hours, that should be sufficient. So for those reasons, I'm comfortable enough to accede to the request of the applicant.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak for or against this amendment? I'll speak against it. Thank you. Look, Abbotsford Street, given lived experience, it does suffer from shortfall of parking at most times of the day. It is a narrow street, as to Member Syme's point, so traversing that can be difficult when it is fully parked out. I note that this application, there's 29 residential dwellings, 4 visitor car bays at any time, whilst it's acceptable to the R codes, is the minimum requirement. And so the additional 2 will obviously alleviate congestion during not just peak times, but outside of that. I note that there is parking, as has been pointed out by the applicant, on Railway Parade, and there's obviously paid parking, private paid parking elsewhere. But as this area continues to be built out in line with the Leadable Precinct Structure Plan, there will be a shortage of parking in all developments caused by this building out. So I'm concerned that if this amendment is approved, notwithstanding subsequent developments in the area, parking will always be a problem. It's currently a problem, and I don't think we should be further exacerbating that by approving the deletion of this condition.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak for or against the amendment?
I'm very supportive of what Deputy Mayor Mayes has said, because this is a very short street and parking is very tight. in that street, and also the flow of traffic is very, very difficult in that street. So therefore, I'm against this being amended.
Thank you. Look, I will briefly speak to the proposed amendment. I take on the views of the members that are most familiar with the area. What I do wish to point out, though, is I think the difference between 4 or 6 bays probably negligible when those bays are located where they are. I think by human nature is such, you'll probably seek to park in the street outside the development rather than go through that gate and find visitor parking at the back in an undercroft area. So I'm just of the view that to perhaps prejudice the ability of extra visitor parking, which is probably, if that's not catered for and perhaps more than adequately, that might put pressure on the streets as well. So I'm probably more comfortable in this situation to allow or go for more resident parking and the less visitor parking, because the usability of those visitors bay I must question anyway, given the location of those. So I'm probably in this situation inclined to support the amendment. Can I pass back to the mover to close?
I don't need to say anything more, thank you.
All right, let's put that amendment to the vote. The amendment is to delete condition 3, which is seeking to convert resident parking to visitor bays. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. That is carried. To you.
I think I'm happy to close there, presiding member.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, would you like to speak to the substantive motion?
No.
Nothing further from you? Councillor Barlow, would you like to speak to the substantive motion? No? Okay.
Look, I think this is a pretty good development. It's been nicely executed. I think it's a few challenges to the site, and also integrating new built form with existing built, maybe a transition there for some time. We don't know how long. I think that's been handled pretty well. I do really quite like the streetscape interface with residential development. I think it's important that we recognise that not every multi-residential development on every street is appropriate to have some sort of non-residential interface. I think that for lots of streets, particularly in this sort of area, there are active streets and there are less active streets, and this is one of the less active streets. And I think the way that the more that we can show, and I think this does it nicely, how a residential on the ground floor can interface at the street level is important. And I think this achieves that quite nicely. And to that extent, I think it might provide a bit of a good example for some other developments. So I think overall, the other areas of issue of overshadowing and overlooking and so on have been pretty well addressed. I think from an overall point of view, this is a good development, so I think we can support it.
Thank you, Member Syme. Look, I am also happy to support. I think the application proposes much needed high quality residential accommodation close to the city, close to public transport and the freeway system, and close to service amenities that will benefit residents. I'm also pleased to see a diversity of dwelling sizes to cater for a broad demographic. I'm comfortable with the non-inclusion of non-residential uses on the ground floor for the development in this specific context, and I agree that the objective of the mixed use zone for street level activation will still be met. I note there were some concerns during public consultation about the height and bulk of the proposal, but I agree with the town's assessment that the scale and form are consistent with the build form outcomes envisaged for this precinct, which is identified for urban renewal and higher density residential development. I think the other issues raised in the submissions have also been responded to appropriately by the town on pages 11 through 13 of their responsible authority report. Town's Design Review Panel has considered the proposal on 3 occasions and support the proposal, subject to further minor design considerations, some of which have been responded to through changes to the design and others determined by the town as not requiring further amendment, and I agree with the officers on those items. We've already dealt with the parking via that amendment, so I won't speak further on that, other to say that I think the parking provision is contextually appropriate and perhaps overdone in terms of resident parking, but I think sometimes that is where the draw on nearby parking comes from, is from residents and not always visitors of the proposal. With that, I will hand back to Member Hyde to close.
Thank you. I think it's always a challenge, isn't it, where there's a transition in the planning framework and we have higher intensity foreshadowed and proposed, and it happens in a fairly incremental way. It can be quite difficult to manage, particularly for a local government. But I think this location, given its relationship to train and bus, and the intensity that's already started to build up is certainly supportive and capable of supporting a development of this nature. I think it's quite maturely proposed. It's been fairly sensitively designed to those developments around, and I think adequately serviced in terms of its parking and its landscape, etc. I think it's a good report from the officers that stepped us through all of those considerations, and the way in which this mitigates some of those responses and submissions from the community. And taking all of that on board, on balance, I think it's a very supportable project, and one which I think will contribute very well to this part of the city, in line with its strategic and its statutory framework. So happy to support as amended.
Thank you, Member Hyde. We're now going to vote on the item recommendation for approval as amended. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Then to item 4, Form 2, DAP applications for Cambridge. There are none. There are also no Section 39 SAT reconsiderations. Part D, other business, SAT applications and Supreme Court appeals. SAT applications for the apps are listed on the website. There is one which relates to an application for Northwood Street, West Leederville. If interested in that, can hop on the website. With that, I close the meeting 11:44 a.m. Thank everyone for participating. Thank our elected members for your participation. And to the staff from town, and to the presenters, and to our secretary. As always, enjoy the rest of your day.